study, we ask a word of wisdom from our Heavenly Father in Yeshua's name. So today's study, it's kind of a study that just fell into my lap, and I've been putting it together. It starts with Acts 1 verse 3. Now we studied this in one of my last videos, and it is 40 days after Passover, Jesus appeared to his disciples. And it says, to whom also he showed himself alive after his passion by many infallible proofs, being seen of them 40 days, and speaking of the things pertaining to the kingdom of God. So he gave them many infallible proofs that it was indeed him, and that he did rise from the dead. So I find this interesting because I see that this is 10 days before Pentecost. And he, when he returns, I believe that we're also going to get a similar type of visitation. I don't know if it'll be Jesus himself, but I think that he's presenting his return with many infallible proofs. And basically those proofs are the days of Daniel. Just to precede this video for you, we're going to look at the 2300 days. It is a proof of the return of Christ. So first I'm going to talk about the 19 years. Why is this 19 years important in prophecy? In Psalms 19 we have the passage of basically the sun, moon, and stars. And it talks about how the sun is put in the path of the stars and that it's its house or tabernacle. And so God put it there and put our planet in orbit around it for a reason, because he was going to set his clock, his creator's clock. So that number 19 is stamped upon the 19th Psalm, which indeed talks about the sun, moon, and stars. Now, in the historical example, if you look at the king of Babylon, which Daniel prophesied that head of gold on his statue was the king of Babylon. And in 604 BC, according to most reckoning, and Adam Rutherford's reckoning, that is when the king of Babylon sieged Jerusalem for the first time. Now, when Jerusalem fell, it was exactly 19 years later, at 585 BC. That was the fall of Jerusalem. So that was a 19-year period that we're also going to see mirrored in prophecy. So I've always wondered, the 2300 years, why isn't it divisible by 360? Why isn't it divisible by 365? Why isn't it evenly divisible by some measure of time that we are familiar with? Why doesn't it fit in this 7 years? So I basically asked the Lord, what is this time period divisible by? Because it didn't seem to fit. It does not seem to fit anywhere. But then when you start looking a little closer, this timeline is evenly divisible by 19. That is short of 1 year. But when you add that last year, you have a final 11 days that the lunar cycle is short of the solar cycle. So what happens is when you put that metonic 19-year cycle onto the 2,300 years, each year being equal to a day or a day being equal to a year, then you have exactly the perfection of the metonic cycle. So this cycle is perfected over this time period. There's actually a couple different months. There's the regular synodical month. That's the lunar month, 29 days. And then there is the anomalistic month, which is 27 days. And basically that month is shorter by 2 days, because when the moon rotates around the earth to get to the same spot where it is in the same phase, it's actually short by 2 whole days. And so that makes the anomalistic month a whole lot shorter than the synodic month, which is 29 days. But amazingly, this 2,300 years balances both months out equally. It's perfect overlay. And I didn't find this out. I found this out by a Swiss astronomer, Deschazaux, and Grattan Guinness, another astronomer, and then there's another one, some Irish astronomer. Really smart people have figured this out. I'm just relaying the information to you so that you know that this time period is perfect. So in Daniel 8:19, so you have the 2,300 days being prophesied in this 8th chapter of Daniel. So this is really interesting. And he said, "Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be." So God appointed an end. When did he appoint this end? He appointed the end in Genesis 1:14, the 4th day of creation. In the 4th day of creation, I use air quotes because the earth was already created. It's like a recreation. But in the 4th day, he appointed the sun and the moon to start their cycles, so that when the sun corrected the moon at the end of this 2,300 years, which is a repeating cycle, then the moon would be corrected and the time appointed would come. So within this, we have a 70-year fig tree generation at the very end of this 2,300 years. And that's if you start the 2,300 years with the splitting up of Alexander's kingdom, and the first king to take over Jerusalem would be King Ptolemy, king of the south. So that was the context of Daniel chapter 8. The historical context was the he-goat whose horn broke. That's Alexander the Great. The horn symbolizes one king. Even the angel defines this is the horn. It symbolizes one king. Not 10 kings. It's not the United Nations. It is one king. Every time you see a horn in prophecy, it symbolizes one king. So anyway, historical context gives you the beginning of the 2,300 years. And isn't it astonishing? Isn't it an infallible proof that it would actually identify the beginning of the fig tree generation? And if you haven't watched prior videos, the reason it identifies a final 70 years is the lunar 2,300 years falls short about 70 years. So there you have Daniel giving you the final fig tree generation, which Jesus said, learn the parable of the fig tree. When you see a tree and it puts forth leaves and there's no fruit on it, then you shall know its summer is nigh. So you know by this very prophecy. Now, when we use Daniel's prophecy as an infallible proof, it locks in the 70-year generation, which is astonishing in itself. That alone would be astonishing to me. But we have more. Numbers 14:34 I've quoted many times. After the number of days in which you searched out the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall you bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and you shall know my breach of promise. So this 2,300 years is a time period where we are not going to control the temple sanctuary mount. We're not going to control it. We are going to be scattered away from that place for this time period. And so that's how you know that the people that are there now are not of Judah. Number one, they don't worship Christ. But number two, this says you're going to bear your iniquities. And why? Why are you going to do this long day, year prophecy? Why? So that you shall know my breach of promise. So he was going to bring them into the promised land. He was like, all right, let's go. We got it all set up. And they didn't have faith. And so God said, you know what? You can wait. you can wait that time period. And so here we have 2,300 years. And so because of that, we have a breach of promise at the end of this time period. So there's this 6 years at the very end of the time period, which is 2,300 days. And it begins at the end of the 2,300 years. So now we have an interlocking time period. And this gives you a total of 76 years, which seems like an odd number, but it's actually, going back to 19 times 4. So now you have the final generation cycle when you include the 70 years and the final 6 years that you are going to know the breach of promise. You have to have the day timeline, the short timeline, because that fits the pattern for Numbers 14:34. You got to have the day period, the time in which they searched out the land. So we're on that day right now. Are you going to be one of the two churches, or the two people, Caleb and Joshua? Are you going to be those two that spy out the land and say, yes, let's go in that final promised land? Or are you going to be afraid and run? And so that's the time period we're in right now, is the final 6 years. So let's look at the 76 years, because guess what? It's divisible by 19, and that's what this 2300 is divisible by. It corrects the Metonic cycle perfectly, better than any calendar. But before they had any capability of finding this out, Daniel in Babylon knew it. So we have 1948, which is the beginning of the 70 years that you saw in the previous chart. Those 70 years are part of the long 2,300 years. And then you can, within this time period, start counting 19-year periods. And they bring you through time. So there's 3 19-year periods, and when you go to the 4th 19-year period, it brings you to 2024-25, for a total of 76 years. Now, that is including the additional 2,300 days, the time to spy out the land. And it's a spiritual eye. This is the only for eyes to see, because if you have eyes to see, then you're going to be spying out the promised land. So it appears that this final 19 years, from 2005 to 2024, are random, and that we just randomly selected by starting in 1948, and it has no other significance, but it does. In astronomical terms, this period of 19 years is a major lunar standstill. And that means that you see the moon down here at the bottom, and it is in the southeast. Okay, so there's the moon right there, and it is in the southeast. It's actually, and this is something I printed out, June 11th from 2025. Okay, it is 6 degrees out of bounds. And what this means in astronomical terms is the sun also, when the sun rises, it doesn't always rise in the east here every single time, does it? And we know during the season, sometimes it rises toward the south, and sometimes it rises toward the north, and these are called solstices. So the moon does the same exact thing, but every single month. And over a period of 19 years, it does it more extremely every single month. So in the year 2024 and in the year 2025 and in the year 2026, it's a 3-year period that there is a major lunar standstill. And the last time for this major lunar standstill was in 2005, 2006, 2007, another 3-year period. So whenever the moon goes outside of where the sun can go, because the sun goes to the right, the sun goes to the left, the moon can actually go further because of its angle of rotation. And it actually can go 6 degrees away from where the sun can even go. And that's called 6 degrees out of bounds. So it's starting that out of bounds territory right now in 2020. Actually, right now, I think in June of 2020, it's beginning its trek of 6 degrees out of bounds. And by the time you get to 2025, at the end of the 19 years, you will be 6 degrees out of bounds. This immediately made me think of something. In Joshua 10:12, we have the famous verse, Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. Okay? So I have a map pulled up here. If you look, you can see Gibeon on the map. You can also see the blue arrows is where the children of Israel chased the Amorites and killed them, up Beth Horon ascent. Now look to the left side of the map and you'll see Ajalon, the valley of Ajalon. You see how they are completely in complete opposite directions. One is east, one is west. So when Joshua spoke, he was looking at the sun. We're not looking directly at the sun, but looking toward the direction of the sun in the east. He was looking toward Gibeon. Now he was up here at the Beth Horon Pass. And this map says dawn. So I guess whoever drew this map thinks that that is when it was dawn. And they had already killed a bunch of Amorites going up the Beth Horon ascent. So there he is, kind of north, and he's looking east, and he says, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon. And then he turns his head and looks, let's see, I don't know which direction here. Turns his head and he looks the other direction over to Ajalon up there, Valley of Ajalon. And he says, Moon, you stand still right where you are at. He didn't look up at the sky and say, stand still in your orbit, or I mean, that might have happened. But what I want to point out here is that he said, stand still in the location. He's looking out at the horizon. So the sun and the moon were in opposite rising points. And that's what the major lunar standstill is when it's at the furthest location, I showed you in the previous slide, the southwest. And the sun is actually in the most northerly location if this was in June. So it's hard to tell exactly what time of year it was. I might be able to figure that out if I do more research. But they're definitely, the sun is over here in the east, the moon is in the west. And so here is another picture I have drawn. This is my Starry Night program. And if you look up here at the top left, it says June 7th, 1412 BC. Now, we really don't know what date it was. It could have been anywhere from 1412 to 1406, which is very popular. But if you look down here in the corner, we have southwest is where the moon is. That would be the Valley of Ajalon. And over here where the sun is, oh, see, I've already circled it, the southwest for the moon. And Gibeon would be over here. So when Joshua was looking and he says, stand still, thou sun, over Gibeon. So it was just rising, the morning sun. And he looks over here at the moon and he says, you're over the Valley of Ajalon, so you stay there and you stay there. So these standstill points are actually solstices. And the moon varies its solstices every month, but every 19 years it does an extremely far away solstice. So this is what we're connecting here. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, I thought I had this on animation. Apparently I did not. So what we see here is, I do have an animation. This cycle is the sun correcting the erratic cycle of the moon. This 2300 years is evenly divisible by our number 19. Plus the last year is where this cycle is perfected. 2 months, synodic and anomalistic. And you also have the number 19 in the last 76 years. And so we also see 4 19s there. And that fourth 19 is actually astronomical for the sun and the moon standing still. So that makes me think of Habbakuk 3:11, or Habbakuk, I don't know how you say it. The sun and the moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. So when the Lord returns, the sun and the moon are going to stand still in their habitation. Could this be referring to these cycles? The last major lunar standstill tying in with the solar solstice standstill. I think I have that definition on this slide. I've cleared it up for you. The moon reaches major lunar standstill at every 19 years. Solstice means sun standing. Sol is sun, stit is to make stand. If you look up the Hebrew words, it says the sun and the moon stood still. It's literally the same terminology used that astronomers use to describe these cycles. It is the place where the sun literally does pause and change direction at the apex months of December and June. Now, like I said, the moon does it every single month. But in 19 years, this very 19 years that we're watching as 4 periods of 19, this very period is a major lunar standstill. And it does it at the very end and at the very beginning. Swings as far as it possibly can, 6 degrees out of bounds, both directions. And it's been doing this every 19 years. That's the cycle. So I just thought I wanted to show you that this final 76 years here is overlapping the 70 years and also overlapping 19 years, which is the number that the 2300 days is perfectly divisible by. I don't think that's a chance. I think that's pretty astonishing, infallible proofs for God setting an appointed time. He set a solar appointed time for his return. Now, we don't know the exact day. We really don't. But when we see the 2 witnesses killed in the streets, and then we know 3.5 days, but we're not going to know exactly what time during that half a day. So if you have 3.5 days, if it starts, in the middle of Friday, that could take you the middle of Saturday, the middle of Sunday, the middle of Monday, and then late Monday night would be the 3.5. So we got to watch, but God has given us these infallible proofs. The fig tree generation, no fruit, the 2300 years being perfectly divisible by 19, and also marking off 19 at the end of time, both overlapping uneven time periods and overlaying the 5 months. Because when you take this down days, and you can, because days equal years, these final days at the very end of the chart, you literally can just replace them. So this would be 2300 days, this would be 70 days, and this would be 6 days. How long is 76 days? Now you have another overlay. It's 2.5 months. That's how long Satan has. It says in Revelation 12 that he made war with the remnant of her seed for time, and a half a time. That is half, as it says in Revelation 8, half of the hour in heaven, which is 5 months. And there you have the same exact pattern, but in days. You might ask, well, where does that extra 6 days come? Because you get each day for a year tacked on to the end. So if you have 2,300 days, how many years is that? That is 6.4 years. So that would, if you had every day for a year, you'd finally tack that on right over here at the very end. That would be your final 6 days, and that gives you 2.5 months. So now everything fits perfectly, and it's possible that this appointed time that God has made, even though he shortened Satan's time, he didn't shorten time itself. He already set the solar clock. He set a solar lunar clock, and he set it in Genesis 1:14, and he has not changed the clock. He's not going to change the clock. He's not going to shorten time itself. He shortened Satan's time, but not time itself. So what happens is, if he's going to return, at said point, say the Lord's going to return at said point, and Satan was supposed to show up, said point, and he shortened Satan's time, like shortened it a lot. But did he shorten time itself? No. Still got to go through. We still have to, if you're going to be alive and remain unto the end, then you're still going to be alive through all the time. And I think that what we're seeing right now in America is a push for the end by the side that wants to mess up God's plan, the evil, wicked side. They're pushing for the end too early. And the end is not going to come too early. God said it in Genesis 1:14, nearly 14,000 years ago. He set this clock. And this clock is not going to change. He set that time that he was going to return. This is it. It's an appointed time. He appointed it. He said, this is when the sun and moon stand still together. The sun's in solstice, the moon is in solstice at the same time, which would be about June. I don't know what day, because, June 21st is the solstice of the sun, and the solstice of the moon, I think, is June 11th. It could be in between there. Nobody knows the day or the hour, because these things are very difficult to calculate. We can't know the day and the hour, but we can watch the events that I have directly above me here, because the 70 days, as it has been prophesied by Jesus Christ, he told us exactly what is going to start those days. Exactly. He said in Luke 21:20, when you shall see Jerusalem surrounded, and the word surrounded should be emphasized. It's World War III. And America's not able to save them. Nobody's able to save them. They're about to be completely obliterated, the whole country. When you see that, then you know that 6 trumps about to blow. That's your sign. It's something you can see with your physical eyes. Jesus said that you would see it. And he also said, when you see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place where he ought not, then let him who reads that understand. And that is written in the Septuagint. Jesus quoted the Septuagint. So Daniel 9:27 in the Septuagint says that he will stand in the holy place. It doesn't say he comes anywhere else in the world. It doesn't say he comes to hide. Jesus did not say that he would hide first and you'd have to seek him out and be real smart and super sleuth. He didn't say that. He said there's going to be wars and rumors of wars right up until the end. There's not going to be a period of peace before the Antichrist arrives. In fact, Luke 21:20 is the opposite of peace. It is impending nuclear World War III. And Jesus Christ is going to, the false Jesus Christ is going to save the false Israel, vilifying or just verifying that they are who they say they are. And this is where the power of the saints, the holy people, is taken away. because of that. So I wanted to show you the many infallible proofs and these timelines. I hope it was understandable. If not, I'll just do another video. All right. God bless. Bye-bye.